usually look at me and direct the question to me. And the question, but I wasn't here, so I'm apologizing. Last week I just wasn't feeling well. I tried to stay for as long as I could, and then I just had to head out. But the question is, in the Orthodox Church, are there times where conjugal relations are prohibited? Actually, in fact, Danny, do you mind to get the rest of our volunteers, Andrew and Don and Ronald? Maybe you guys can sit here, because for the second half, I'm going to ask you guys some questions and get you guys to kick in. Thanks. So, are there times where conjugal relations are prohibited? What you probably have heard if you've been in Orthodox circles is that yes, there are times where conjugal relations are prohibited before communion, after communion, during fasting periods, and a variety of other things. To be honest with you, I don't entirely know where that came from. I know that it is inspired for sure by 1 Corinthians 7, one of the most misunderstood and misinterpreted chapters of the Bible, where St. Paul is making an appeal for celibacy, and he's trying to say that being celibate is a good thing, but he's not saying that at the expense of marriage. And actually, in the 6th century, I think there were 2 councils in a row that outright anathematized, like excommunicated anyone who put down marriage and said that celibacy was better. So that's certainly not the understanding of 1 Corinthians 7. But in 1 Corinthians 7, St. Paul says that, there may be times where you will choose not to have conjugal relations so that you can devote yourselves to fasting and prayer. So from that, people have interpreted that as when the church is in a season of fasting, or when you are personally in a season of fasting, you must abstain from your intimacy and your sex life. That is not, as to my knowledge, how the church understands that passage. That the passage again says that you may choose at times to refrain from conjugal relations to devote yourselves to fasting and prayer. Not when you are fasting and praying, you are prohibited from conjugal relations. Does that make sense? So, and the idea is simply this. As you may remember from the intimacy session last week, it was talking a little bit about how men and women are a little bit different, and men are stimulated largely visually, and are very easily stimulated. Like for the ladies, we're kind of like, we just have like a little switch. We just turn it on and we're ready to go, right? The engine's always hot. We're just ready to go. Women are a little different, they're stimulated maybe more emotionally, and these are hasty generalizations. They may apply in certain degrees more or less to different people, right? We accept that, but in broad strokes, right? So in my own marriage, right, when I realized that we really want to have some good intimacy, I have to, it's a very thoughtful and deliberate process. I make sure that we have time that's going to be uninterrupted. Now that we have a child, it's even more complicated, not complicated, but whatever, requires more thought and more deliberation. All day I do nice, sweet things for Mary, and I remind her of how much I love her, and so on. And I probably should do that all the time, but the reality is we get busy and so on, right? And we work up to it, right? And and then our intimacy is great, right? But it just doesn't really work well for me to just kind of flick the switch on, because that's just kind of not how women are made for the most part. Of course, these are hasty generalizations. You know what I mean, right? So what I'm saying is, it takes some thoughtfulness and some deliberation, and it's better that way, right? And an investment. So you may choose at times, sometimes of your life, to dedicate that investment solely for worship, right? Solely for God, right? But a couple of things. Number one, that should be a decision that is like mutual, right? So it shouldn't be like a one-way thing. So one person says, I think we should devote ourselves to fasting and prayer, and the other person's like, no, right? That's not really fair. Secondly, it has to be something that is self-limited, because we spent all this time talking about how our intimacy is a reflection of our life with God and nurtures our life with God and our relationship with God. So it shouldn't be one at the expense of the other, but they should be things that complement each other. The last thing is, I'll give you just very, very practical advice. I asked my spiritual father about this before we got married, and he told me, his answer to me was, you'll figure it out. And I told him, what does that mean? Like, is that yes or no? Like, I need lines drawn in the sand, because I will manipulate this, I will milk this, if you leave it up to me. He told me, you will figure it out. And he was right, like over the years, there are times where Mary and I have just naturally said, you know what, we really want to just spend this time with God, right? And whether it was explicit or implicit that, we weren't really going to have sex during that time, that was, like it kind of just developed on its own. And I would strongly recommend that, at least for the first couple of years, that you don't have kind of, because this is something new that you're doing with your partner for the long term, and you really want to, and we talked all about how like the world, like the society's kind of conditioning that the church anyways doesn't really agree with, right? So we want to kind of develop a new conditioning, a new pattern, and that's going to take some time, right? So you want to invest in your intimacy, you want to invest in your sex life for the first, at least for the first year, for the first couple of years, really, and develop that healthy pattern of, I want to give myself to you, right? And conditioning, we all know, is like a repetitive thing. Pavlov's dog, it wasn't the first time they rang the bell that he went chasing after, like he came running for the bell, like when the bell rings, right? Like the first time they ring the bell, like he smells the meat, he comes. The second time, the third time, the next time they ring the bell, there's no meat, but he still comes because he got conditioned. It's a repetitive thing. So like having a healthy and vibrant sex life early on is a great thing, and I think that these prohibitions or whatever should be kind of like under the guidance of someone who can guide you in your relationship to be the most mild. Or if you want my frank opinion, what I tell like the couples that I care for, I tell them for the first 2 years, just do what you do, and if you have any questions, just be very honest and forthright and come discuss them with me. But don't be restricted. That's not what it's not intended as a restriction, but it's something that makes you truly free.
I just have one question. The Holy Synod just came out with proclamations as to when a woman and a man can have communion, or when they can't have communion. And one of the things that they said for the men was that if they had, for example, wet dreams, then technically they're not allowed to have communion the next day. So, in that sense, how does it work with a spouse?
So you might be more in the loop than I am with what the Holy Synod is saying, and I've told the Pope multiple times that there's a whole lot of us now, priests, who don't read or write Arabic, and we really need communications with us in a language that we understand. But outside of that, this leads us to a different conversation that I don't want to kind of spend too much time on, which is that all of the rites and rituals of the church are there for us to set us free, not to hinder us. All of the rites and rituals in the church are supposed to be a privilege, not an obligation. So when the church puts forward to us certain prohibitions, rules, lines in the sand, and so on. Those are there. Those are there really to teach us and to guide us. And the reality is that if you take if you take any recipe for life and you try to apply it without any guidance, you're likely to find some confusion. So I would say, take all of this to the person who knows you best, discuss it with that person, and get personalized advice. But something that is certain is that there's a whole lot of guilt and shame and shadows around intimacy and sexuality in people's minds and in people's hearts. And something that is certain, without a shadow of a doubt, I don't have any the slightest hesitation to say that all of that guilt and shame and all those shadows are demonic. 100% demonic. God wants you to have a holy and healthy and happy sex life. He does. He really wants that for you, right? He really wants you to have that conditioning of giving yourself freely, knowing that you're participating in His free gift. You're being a member of His body. His giving is your giving, and your giving is part of His giving. And to participate with Him in that. And when I was before alluding to, if you do have any sadness or any shame or any guilt or anything in that's bothering you about your past, speak to somebody and put all of that to bed. No pun intended. Get it all gone. Get it all before you go in, because your spouse, your partner deserves the best of you. They deserve, and St. John, and this exceeds again the scope of this, but St. John Chrysostom talks about secondary virginity, and he talks about those who repent sometimes being more virgin than those who haven't, right? And there's so much joy and hope and gladness that is associated with this in the early church's thought. Make sure you're going into your marriage with that, and not with any shame or any guilt or any sadness. There is freedom from all of that, where you can really celebrate God and who He is. So I'm just going to invite our volunteer couples. We have a volunteer couple and two halves. I'll just invite Andrew and Donna and Rano to come sit up here, and Daniel when he gets back. Next up, we were going to talk about roles, and I was going to share some scripture with you. So just sharing some scripture with you. This is scripture that we shared during the wedding ceremony. So I'm just gonna read this passage from Ephesians 5, and I'm gonna ask our support couple. Sorry to put you on the spot. They didn't have any foreknowledge of this. It was Mary's idea. I give all credit to her. To just tell us a little bit, what does this mean to you on a very practical day-to-day basis, right? So from Ephesians chapter 5, submitting to one another in the fear of God. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is head of the church, and He is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for her, that He might sanctify her and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that He may present her to Himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his own wife as himself, and let a wife see that she respects her husband. What does that mean to you?
Okay, so the way that I think we've always interpreted this is that in our family, like which now consists of me and Donna, we're both like equal partners when it comes to decision making, when it comes to anything that has to be done, or any priorities or decisions that need to be made. That we're both equal partners, but that a ship with no captain kind of doesn't go anywhere, and so one of us kind of has to take maybe the final decision, or sort of steer the thing. So oftentimes, like, it just comes down to whoever wants to take that lead role, and sometimes it's me and sometimes it's Donna when it comes to different aspects of our life that we make decisions. And then when it comes to the respect and love part, the way I've always viewed it is like there are things that are expected of me as a husband, and there are things that are expected of Donna as a wife. And if we both do our part, then that, none of that really, it's not that like cut and dry. Like, Donna doesn't only respect me, also means I respect her because I have to love her. And it doesn't mean that Donna just respects me, it also means that she loves me as well. So as long as we both are sort of doing our best to put the other person first, then we fulfill all those commandments that were given to us. And as an aside, after our wedding, my parents gave us a gift of like the two sets of commandments, like given to the husband and wife, like framed, so that we can have them like on our nightstand, so they're always there and we always remember them. So that's we always have them in front of us whenever we wake up. They're there.
I'll just add something small to this. So I think a lot of women, when they read that verse, it's like, oh, that's not fair. Like, why do I have to submit? That's so backwards thinking. Like, we live in the 21st century, and so on and so on. But for me, I think how I apply it is, and something that I totally am guilty of sometimes, and I used to be guilty of a lot, is when I'm like with my friends, making sure not to bring the negative aspects of my marriage into that and make my husband look bad in front of other people. Like when we're having a fight, I don't have to, publicize it all the time. And yeah, just making sure that you respect each other in front of other people. And yeah, so, and I think I mentioned this before, but not taking every issue to your parents because they tend not to forget it, even though you may have moved on. So that's really, like, I tend to focus so much, a lot more on the respect aspect of it rather than the submission. Because, I mean, like Ronald said, it's just about respecting each other. I respect him, he respects me. It's not about me just submitting or him.
So for me, one thing when I read this and I did a little background study on it, it actually works out to the advantage of the girl. I'm serious. I'll explain it to you from what I understood. It actually works to the advantage of the girl that she submit to her own husband. If we go to what Abuna was talking to us earlier today about how Christ is the head and we are the church, or the church is the body. If we apply the same analogy and we say that I am the head as the man and my wife is the body as the church, as my spouse, everything that she does, she submits to me and I make the decision. But everything that I do as my decision is in the best interest of my wife. So my wife needs to be submissive to me, to give me the opportunity to do what she wants to do. So I give her everything that she wants. So ultimately, if let's say I had a disagreement with my wife and I want to go left and she wants to go right, or I want to go up and she wants to go down, or we want to go here and I want to go there, if she's submissive, then it comes back to me to give it back to her where she wants to go. So she is ultimately, like, I mean, I might be the head, but she's the legs. You know what I mean? She's gonna go wherever she wants to go, but I make the call in where she wants to go. So it works out to the advantage of the girl if she actually is fully submissive, and therefore the guy reciprocates and he makes a decision in what the girl wants to do at the end of the day. That's just how I always interpret it. It actually works out really well, and it's not backwards thinking, it's actually very forwards thinking. And then when you apply this, it's like, ultimately then you can take it another step, and what is the girl going to want to do? She's not going to be thinking selfish. She's going to want to please her man or please her husband. So she's going to want what her husband wants, and her husband is going to see that she wants that, and he's going to give it to her, and then you are really becoming one. You really take steps forward.
Any other comments?
I had read this verse and looked into it a bit too, and I just saw it as a way, like when we go to a spiritual father or anything like that, you kind of give the sin factor of what you're doing to your guide, and they make the decision, and through obedience you're kind of washed of your sin as long as you're obedient. So in the same way, if the wife is actually submissive to the husband and the husband cares to lead them to Christ, the woman frees herself from a lot of sin by being submissive to her husband. So it becomes where you're the spiritual guide and the father of your relationship with both of you. So through that, you kind of, to me, I feel like it's a lot less stress to be washed of that responsibility. Yeah, I still think it's better. I'd rather be submissive, to be honest.
We could spend a whole weekend talking about this, but we won't, I promise. I'm just going to make two very quick comments. The first is this whole mutual self-sacrifice business and mutual submission business only really works if it's mutual, right? If one person is on the self-sacrifice train and the other person is on the compromise train, remember, like, what is compromise, right? Compromise is we'll do what I want today, and we'll do what you want tomorrow, or we'll do what you want today, and then we'll do what I want tomorrow, right? Compromise is, you know, we'll see the chick flick this Tuesday, and we'll see the action movie next Tuesday, and we'll just go back and forth like this. And if we see two chick flicks in a row, you had better know that I'm keeping track, right? That's what compromise is. Compromise is where two parties are equally satisfied and also equally dissatisfied. Frankly, I think that's kind of very sad, right? I think the path of self-sacrifice is so much more joyful. Today we're going to see the chick flick. Next week we're going to see the chick flick. The week after that we're going to see the chick flick. I hate chick flicks, but we're going to see a chick flick every single week because I want to make you happy. I live to make you happy. And if the other person is trying to do the same thing, right, then you're still fighting, but you're fighting to make the other person happy. You're fighting for the other person's interests, right? And you're trying to get your way, which is actually really their way, right? So the self-sacrifice thing is actually great. And from an outward perspective, you're probably going to end up meeting in the middle most of the time. Then you're going to say, well, so why all this headache, Father John? Why not just, if self-sacrifice brings you to the same place as compromise does, you just kind of end up meeting in the middle most of the time and the rest comes out in the wash, then why even bother? Because the self-sacrifice pathway is so much more joyful, right? But it only works if it's mutual. If it's not, if you throw yourself under the bus for the other person all the time, and they're not on the same path as you, then it becomes painful, right? Not joyful. So you kind of have to both be on the same train. If the other person is convinced that you will always do what is in their best interest, why would they not fight for yours? So when we read this and we find this difficult, let's be honest, okay? Let's call a spade, you know? So now I'm not going to be polite. When I was talking about being polite, okay, I'm going to say the truth. When I read this and I say, man, this is hard. I have to give myself to my wife the way Christ gives himself to the church? Dude, that's like asking a lot. What I'm really saying is, I'm not confident that Mary has my best interests in mind. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. When I say, when Mary says, I don't think I can submit to John, what does she say? Why can't she submit to me? Because she's not sure that she's going to have the very best, that the very best is going to get done for her, right? That's why. That's why we have self-defense mechanisms. Isn't that a problem? Isn't it a problem that I'm trying to defend myself from the person whom I am one with? Like, isn't there something wrong with that? So whether you submit or you don't, or you give yourself like Christ gives to the church or not, I don't think that's the issue. I think the underlying issue is the issue, right? I think the underlying, why do I not feel ready or willing to throw myself with reckless abandon into the arms of my spouse, right? And I want to tell you, if that's how you feel, that's okay. That's okay if you do something about it, right? Pray about it. Ask the Holy Spirit to come into your heart and to help to heal your pain, your wounds. We all have pain. We all have wounds. We all had fantastic parents, fantastic siblings, fantastic upbringing, fantastic everything, but we still have wounds, right? My parents were great, but they weren't perfect. I'm trying to be the best parent I can be, but I know I'm not going to be perfect, as much as it kills me to say it, right? Right? And I have wounds, and I have hurts, right? And I need to deal with them. And in dealing with them, I'm becoming better, I hope, God help me, becoming a better husband day by day as I'm learning to let down my guard and love my wife and not worry about my own interests as much, right? And it's a process, right? But just imagining that I'm going to be perfectly able to make myself perfectly vulnerable to the other person right off the get-go is kind of wishful. That's what underlies all of this. That's the first thing. The second thing I would say about this, right, is if this bothers you, right? If this bothers you, just look at it not from an idealistic perspective or a theoretical perspective, but look at it from a practical perspective. How does Christ treat the church? Christ says, treat others with love and respect and, love your neighbor as yourself. And then the church we do all kinds of bad things, right? Like, right? God doesn't come and chop off our hands or something, right? Like, I tell God, I really want to go left. He says, I think we should really go right. He says, let's go right. I look at the right and then I go left. God doesn't cause me to get immediate paralysis, right? Despite Christ being the head and we being his body, he still lets us do whatever we choose, right? He doesn't infringe on our free will, right? So despite the husband being the head of the family or whatever, however the head of the marriage or however you want to see it, right? That doesn't mean that what he says always happens. In fact, Christ always respects our free will. It's like, if you read about respect from a religious perspective, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling the height of the respect that God has for us. Like, to what high degree God respects us. That's the respect that we're called to have for each other in marriage. So I'll just leave you with just those two thoughts in regards to this passage, that despite Christ being the head of his body, he doesn't infringe on the body's free will, which is the church, and the first thing that we discussed as well. In our family, it's very similar to what Donna and Rano described, that there will always be, we've kind of agreed that there will always be one person who kind of takes the lead in certain things. We just did like a big house renovation, right? And I get genius ideas, but some of them are so genius no one recognizes them to be genius except for me, right? I.e., like they're probably not a good idea, right? And Mary is much more inclined in like the whole like design world, right? So you know, when it came to like choosing like colors and tiles and hardwood and this and that, you know what? Yeah, Mary made almost all of those decisions, right? But I learned something. I learned something when we were house shopping, and it came up when we were car shopping, and it came up in a lot of our home renovation decisions, and it's finally clicked. First time we were house shopping, we saw several houses that were great, but we never made the move to buy them. Our house shopping kind of went like this. The first time we went out, we saw a bunch of houses. Mary saw us, would see them, like we would see them together, right? And I'd say, yeah, I could live here, right? And Mary would be like, no, we could never live here because of this, because of that, and then the second time, the same thing. And I realized, hey, I could pretty much live anywhere, but Mary has some very specific requirements. So, you know what? Like, as long as I feel like I can live there, like Mary's going to make this decision, right? And I was pretty okay with that. So for 9 months, we go from house to house. And then one day it dawned on me, the morning we were supposed to go out and look at houses, that Mary is not going to make this decision. Mary doesn't want the burden, like she doesn't want, at that time it was an over $500,000 decision. Yes, there was a time where you could buy a house in Toronto or north of Toronto for just over $500,000. But anyhow, right? She doesn't want to carry the burden of that decision alone. She wants me to carry the burden of that decision. So I decided that I was going to take the ugliest, most disgusting house and say, we should buy this house and make a case for it and see what happens, right? And so I did that, right? And as I was saying the words, I really felt God telling me, this is the house that you should buy. And we actually ended up buying it. And it just needed some paint and some minor renos, and it turned around beautifully. But the reality is, Mary, I realized I did this little experiment. God engineered for me to do this little experiment on the day that we would see the house that we would buy after 9 months of house shopping, right? And I was right. Although Mary has much better intuition than I do, and she's much smarter than I am, and has much better design, and is much more practical, like in day-to-day life, right? And she really should be the person making this decision. She doesn't want to make this decision, or she certainly doesn't want to make this decision alone, right? She wants my signature to be there so that I can be the one to carry the burden of that decision, and I'm glad to do it. So that's kind of how we have integrated these roles, head of the family, head of the marriage, all that kind of stuff. This is very much how we have kind of integrated it. I thought I just illustrated that story. Any other questions or anything else anybody wants to say about roles, and who does what and that kind of stuff?
There's a really good book called Preserve Them, O Lord that Abuna Botros recommended for us. It's not really available in print anymore. It's from the 70s or the 80s, but we got it off Amazon. And it starts, it's by an Eastern Orthodox priest, and it has a really nice explanation of this passage. I can't explain it because I'll butcher it, but it talks about how it's reflective of the Trinitarian relationship, and it's really nice, especially if you're like a feminist and don't have a gut instinctively positive reaction to this passage. So that's just a recommendation.
Absolutely, and on that note, there's also an amazing chapter in a book called Marriage as God Intends, the same one that the conflict resolution bit is inspired by. This would be a really good time to just mention that all the stuff I'm talking about is stuff that comes from resources. To not burden you and not make it sound like some academic talk. I have a very academic background. I'm not mentioning all the resources, but there are specific chapters and specific books that all this stuff is from. So if you want to read more, or if you want more, just let me know. And I have almost all of those books, including Preserve Them, O Lord, as PDFs, so I can easily Would love to order you a copy if that would be a blessing to you in your relationship and your marriage. But also, I can send you an electronic copy in the meantime. There's another passage on marriage that Jesus says, I'll ask our support couples to comment on this as well. Jesus says, "Now it came to pass, when Jesus had finished these sayings, that he departed from Galilee and came to the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And great multitudes followed him, and he healed them there. The Pharisees also came to him, testing him, and saying to him, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason?' And he answered and said to them, 'Have you not read that he who made them at the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no man separate.'" What do you think?
Hold on.
So Donna and I had an interesting discussion the other day. It was a bit of a dark discussion, but it was kind of funny. I was like, "Donna, are we gonna get divorced in like 15, 20 years?" And she's like, "Why are you asking?" And I'm like, "Well, because like a lot of people stay married for a long time, and then for whatever reason, after 15, 20 years, they get a divorce. Like, why does that happen? How do we make sure that doesn't happen?" And then Donna was like, "Nope, that's not gonna happen." And I'm like, "Why not?" She's like, "Because we're Orthodox. We're not allowed to." And I was like, "Well, I mean, there's got to be a much better reason than that for us to always like be in love with each other and want to stay together." I don't think we have the answer to that yet. And I don't know if this passage gives us that answer. But I think, for like the conclusion or the outcome of that conversation, as weird as it was like, well, let's just try to make sure that never happens, and let's always like, keep that in our mind, is that we have to like keep our marriage strong and healthy, and we have to like keep loving each other, regardless of like how our life situations are changing. So, let no man separate.
For me, it's just pretty straightforward. It's just you get married it's a sacrament, it's a holy mystery, and so the idea of a divorce or a separation is just not to be thought of. That like this is just, it's not something that you would discuss. It's not something that you would even consider. It's just, yes, it happens in our society and it happens around us, and even to the point where they started, you get these divorce lawyers and they start marketing on billboards on the highway, life's too short. Right, you always have to be happy, and people get through fights, and they're just hoping to cash in on a couple going on during a fight or something, and then start planting these little seeds and be like, yeah, you do have options. Well, really, no, you don't have that option. It's not an option. And then the idea that, well, there's the condition. What if I'm unfaithful? Once you start your mind on that thought process of being unfaithful, it becomes a lot more than just a divorce or a separation. It becomes, I'm not just cheating against my wife, I'm cheating against my God. My eternal salvation is tied to my marriage, and I'm willing to put that all at risk because I'm getting in a fight with my wife, and an opportunity to cheat on my wife presented itself, and I'm debating on going for it, or I'm going to go, or I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be unfaithful to my wife, and yeah, it doesn't matter if I get a divorce because I don't really care for her anymore anyways. But then now I'm putting my eternal salvation on the line. I'm putting going to heaven on the line. And that's really what life is all about, is getting into heaven and preserving my eternal salvation. So it's not worth it. It's just, even looking at a cost-benefit analysis, it's just the worst decision you could ever make.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that point of it's not an option. I mean, I think that's what I was alluding to when I answered his question. I was like, not an option, like I'm Orthodox. But more than that, it's just, I guess, been like, I don't know, the way I was raised, I always knew it wasn't an option. And when you know it's not an option, you work that much harder to make sure that it works. Because there's the option is, never to fail. So you're always just thinking of how to improve your marriage.
Yeah, one other thing I've always thought of is whenever we do have a fight, I always think like this is just a fight, like it's like an internal fight that I might have with myself. It doesn't mean that I'm going to like dissolve who I am because I don't agree with some aspect of my personality or something. Like if I'm having a fight with my wife, she's part of who I am. It's just a fight we're having and it'll pass and we'll figure out a solution to it, but that is not the like dissolution of our marriage, the result of that fight. It's just something where we grow from it.
What do you think, like, from knowing people's situations, what do you think the biggest reason for the breakdown?
So I'm not gonna appeal to my experience, but I'll appeal to research. The two most common reasons why people fight in marriage are intimacy and finances. So know that if you guys if ever you find yourself not seeing eye to eye in either of those departments, you're not alone. So those are necessarily and oftentimes the two things, and that I might explode at Mary because the sink is full of dishes, and I come home at 11 o'clock at night and like, what have you been doing all day, and so on, right? But it may actually have nothing to do with the dishes. It may have more to do with the bedroom or the bank account. Maybe it is all about the dishes, but it probably isn't. So it's usually those two departments that get people all stirred up. This passage is the passage actually that we read in the Orthodox marriage service, the crowning liturgy. And it's funny that we read a passage which has like the D word in it, like divorce, right? So actually I got very similar advice. I got some really, really good advice prior to getting married, and one of them was just take that word out of your vocabulary. Like our couples were saying, it's just kind of not an option, and we're gonna figure it out. And if you look at the very end of the passage, therefore what God has joined together, let no man separate. Jesus is telling us that nothing is gonna dissolve this marriage except people, right? So it's either gonna be my doing, or it's gonna be her doing, or it's gonna be a third party's doing, right? So let's start with what's easiest. The third party, keep the third party out, right? So as long as there are no third parties, we're already way ahead of the game. Some other great stuff I heard prior to getting married. One of my friends who's a priest, really nice guy, really affectionate guy, really open guy, loves everybody, hugs everybody, kind to everybody. And he's saying this in a sermon. He was talking about how he's a really open and affectionate person. He goes, but don't be fooled. I know that every single woman out there is public enemy number one of my marriage. And if I want to protect the one thing that brings the most value to my life, my marriage, I need to know that every one of you lovely women in the room have the capacity to destroy and rob me of what is most valuable to me. I'm not putting all the onus or responsibility on. We all make our own decisions. If someone's unfaithful, it's not the other person's fault. You get what I'm getting at, right? So, in my own life as a priest, or in practice as a priest, or in life in general, I love everybody. I'm kind to everybody. I try to treat everybody the same. I try not to discriminate, like based on gender or whatever, right? But I know, being someone who is attracted to people of the opposite gender, that every single woman out there has the capacity to one day separate what is so precious to me. So I just need to be a little careful. I just need to be a little thoughtful. I just need to be a little intentional, right? About making sure that my wife, that my husband, that my partner, that my marriage is safe. Because it's not usually anything other than human beings that separate things. So the other reason why we read this passage during the marriage ceremony is something actually really, really beautiful. He says, in the beginning, he made them male and female. If you read in Genesis chapter 2, when it says, when it talks about humankind, it talks about humanity as a whole, as a unit. That is only, a human is only whole in as much as they are both male and female. We complement each other on every level, like our anatomy complements each other. Our personalities complement each other. Emotionally, we complement each other, right? We fill in the gaps for each other, right? And God created us to be that way. And God interacts with us as a humanity that way. Even if you look at the word, and I'm not going to do like a full word study with you, but if you look at the word for man, like let us create man in our image and likeness, is both said in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis chapter 1, the word is Adam, right? Adam, right? Which is, distinctly masculine in Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis chapter 2, the word is a compound word. And the two words that make up the compound word are male, female. Right? And Jesus is referring to that. He's saying marriage is the relationship between God and the church, like we read in Ephesians chapter 5, the relationship between not God and a man or God and a woman, but God and humanity. Humanity is only whole. It's like yin and yang or whatever. It's only whole. It's only whole in as much as it is both male and female. So just a little bit about that. It was suggested at a previous time that we one time do a session about. Is there a hand up? Oh, sorry.
One tip one of my married friends gave me once was they have a really wonderful marriage. They're young, but their marriage it just feels old and loving and successful. And one of the things they do on a regular basis is if one of them has had an experience during the day where they've talked to somebody in line at the grocery store, a guy behind or a girl behind them, just chatted maybe a bit too long, or like saw an ad that made them think some things. Maybe they come home and they talk to their spouse about it. They say, I met this person today, or I saw this video today, or whatever it is that made them struggle and made them want something other than the other person, something that they would want to naturally hide from the other person. They are open and honest about it and talk about it when it's in like the seed stage and the infancy stage. And that's something that has helped them build trust in one another, but also not be afraid of the things that are temptations for them. So that's something that I really want to continue in my relationship and grow into my marriage as well.
I had a question as well. Just tying into even the scripture before that ties into this one. What are your thoughts on like abuse in relationships? So even how you mentioned with the last one where it's, if someone's always sacrificed for the other person, the other person is not, and then the relationship just becomes very unhealthy. And this is something that I've thought about, and then it says let no man separate. But if it becomes that unhealthy relationship, I'm just curious your thoughts on that kind of how that ties in. So it's also a very deep question that is probably more than a 2-minute answer, but.
I'll give the punchline, but like I was saying, one of the suggestions that came up in one of the previous times we did this series was to have a whole session on separation and divorce. There's a lot that can be said, but very simply, so marriage is a path of holiness. Marriage is, like we said, it's a path that is teaching me, is conditioning me to deny myself, take up my cross, and follow Jesus, right? That's what marriage is. When marriage stops being that, then it becomes, then there's a problem. That doesn't necessarily mean that the marriage needs to end, but it means that there's a problem that needs to be fixed, right? And he is the divine physician. He is the healer. He has a solution for everything. And most people would say that any marriage that people want to work at can be saved. I'm actually reading a lot about that topic, about that the last straw. But that's basically what it comes down. That is the party line, yes, in the Orthodox Church. That marriage is a path of holiness. If it is no longer possible for it to be a path of holiness, then something must be done. But nothing is impossible for God, right? So if it is no longer possible for God, it's no longer possible because of our own free will. There's a comment in the back. I'm just to be very clear and very blunt, because this requires to be very clear and very blunt. I'm in no ways, in any way, shape, or form, condoning any form of domestic abuse or violence, emotional, verbal, intellectual, physical, sexual. No, absolutely not. There is a zero tolerance policy in the Orthodox Church. Absolute zero tolerance policy. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'm just trying to give a very general answer. But just to be very, very, very clear, in all cases of domestic violence, that's the first thing that we kind of go into it with, making it very clear that this will absolutely not be tolerated in either direction, towards the wife, towards the husband. Absolute zero tolerance policy, just to be very, very clear about that. Mary, I'm just going to clarify that. Yes, you're... Mm-hmm. So... infidelity. If there is any form of deception prior to marriage, that can be grounds for annulment. So there's different things. There's different things. We kind of have like 14 minutes left, and I want to lighten the mood with a funny video. So I'm just gonna. There's in the Orthodox Church, there's divorce, there's annulment, there's conditions for both. Formally speaking, in the Orthodox Church, there is no such thing as divorce, but it's a whole kind of different conversation. I'm willing to discuss it. Let's talk about something a lot lighter. Who better to lighten the mood than Tyler Perry? actually left the best for last. I really don't want to miss out on honestly the best thing I ever read or heard or anything, head and shoulders way better than anything I ever learned about conflict resolution. All the stuff we teach in this course is good. You know, using gentle language, inclusive language, I feel as opposed to you always, staying away from the superlatives, you always, you never. All that stuff is good. All that stuff is helping to deal with the festering issue, right? But like I mentioned earlier, I read this and I thought that it was so life-changing for me that I thought that the whole book was about this, or the whole chapter was about this. It turned out that it was just a few lines in this book called Marriage as God Intends by Selwyn Hughes, and the chapter is called Fight Like a Christian. And he's talking about conflict resolution, and he talks about a lot of really good things. He talks about our immediate, like we all have an immediate reaction to conflict. First of all, he talks about how conflict is going to happen. Like we all told you about conflict, specific examples of conflict in our own marriages, and we are happily married. And I know these guys really well. They also. It's not perfect. It's a work in progress, but it's perfect because it's married. It's perfect because it's that person, and there's no one else that I would want to be fulfilling that role. So conflict is going to happen because we're different. And my cross that I'm carrying when I'm saying marriage is a path of holiness, and I'm taking up my cross and following Jesus, is not my spouse. You know, I have to take up my cross and follow my spouse, right? So it's not marriage itself. It's actually my own selfish desires. But because I have selfish desires, I do, and my wife is a saint and she's amazing, but naturally, I'm sure she does as well. Conflict arises. That's okay. We all have a natural inclination towards conflict, right? And some of us withdraw, some of us win, some of us yield, some of us compromise, and some of us resolve. Resolving is sort of the best thing, and I would talk about all of those in much more depth, but I really don't want to miss out on the silver bullet. None of this is the silver bullet. The silver bullet is simply this. All conflict, and this is really almost the reason we have this brunch, and the reason why we make it very clear that this brunch is really Christian and is really based in Christian principles. And I desperately wish that I could share this with people who don't know Jesus, because it's life-changing, but I can't, because it's all based on Him. Almost all conflict, the reality is all conflict, is based in one of two sins, either pride or anger. Really it is, right? Like I'm upset about the dishes, and the dishes really have to do with me being upset about the bedroom, and the bedroom is really, how dare she, right? How come? It's based, and usually one person is proud and the other person is angry. They may be both angry or they may be both proud, but usually, it's one person doing one is the other. Now, keeping simple things simple, like I'm a simple person, I like to just keep it simple, right? Both of them are sins. A sin is to miss the mark, is to not to live up to the fullness of the potential that God has designed for me to live up to. So any conflict that I have with my spouse is a sin against God long before it was ever a sin against my spouse. Before I try to deal with this conflict, now, we're trying to decide, this or that and whatever, as we're leaving the house, we get into a big fight and we end up not going anywhere, and everybody goes their separate ways. She goes to the family room, I go to the bedroom, right? And now, we're going to be late for whatever we're going to, so I'm going to go try to make things up so we can get out of here, so we can go, so we can get on with our lives, right? Never going to work. Before I go and deal with my wife, my husband, my partner, before I go and deal with them, I need to go and deal with my God. I sinned against my God before I sinned against my spouse. I need to go and get down on my knees and repent and ask God for forgiveness. And usually, and this isn't how it has to go for you, but this is usually how it goes for me. I get down on my knees, and I usually, I'm like, God, I'm sorry that I was, priding myself against my wife and blah, 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 and, please make things better and help us kind of just get on with our lives. And that's usually how it starts, and that usually goes nowhere. And then all of a sudden, I hear my father-in-law's voice coming from the top corner of the room, right? And I kind of hear him saying to me, like God's persona in my father-in-law's voice, right? Saying to me, this is my daughter, and I really love her. And here she is, giving her to you. Please take care of her. Please, this is my daughter. She's the only one I have. Please take care of her. So not only did I not care for her, I directly disrespected the one request of my father-in-law. Because my wife, long before she was my wife, she was the daughter of our Father in heaven. And the way that I talked to her and the way that I treated her did not do her justice, and certainly did not do him justice. And when I have that conversation with God, with tears in my eyes, and then I go to have that conversation with my wife with tears in my eyes, it's like nothing ever happened. Works every single time. Every single time. Make it right with God, He will make it right with your spouse. Every single time. It works. It's a silver bullet. Every single time. 100%. Come and tell me about a time that it didn't work for you. I'm still waiting. And I make this pitch every single time we do this marriage prep series with all the couples that I support and all the young people that I care for and that I pastor, and not a single one of them has come back to me and told me it didn't work. You all know me. I try to be a very relatable, a very honest, a very down-to-earth person. Come and tell me it didn't work. Works every single time. Make it right with God. He will make it right with your spouse. Try to do it on your own, and good luck to you. All the skills and all the psychology and all that stuff is to not make the injury worse. Makes an existing problem worse. It doesn't fix it. Fix it with God, everything else gets resolved. Everything else gets resolved. God has given me His most precious daughter. Look, have I asked any of you to babysit my daughter, my biological daughter? No. If I did, I would like you to know that would be the highest compliment I could possibly give you. And that's for maybe a couple of hours so that Mary and I can have some alone time. God hasn't given me His daughter for a couple of hours. He's given her to me for life. How much does He respect me? And how much is He expecting for me to live up to that respect? And how much am I not living up to it in the way that I speak to my wife, and the way that I treat her, and the way that I like her? So I need to make it right with God. Glory be to God forever and ever. Amen. We'll end on that note. If you have any questions or any comments or any thoughts at all, please don't hesitate to speak with the support couples or to come and speak with me. I know we opened a lot of topics and we came to some conclusions, maybe not all of them. Please let this be the beginning of a dialogue, not the end of one. God bless you. Have a great rest of your day. Don't hesitate to ask for any resources, where all of any of this came from. They're all available, and we can easily email them to you. Anything that you want more information about. God bless you.